don't think I quite expected this morning to be like this. I thought that I didn't realise it was a kind of love-in. Thank you all so much. That was a lovely welcome, though. Really appreciate it. Yeah, so it was interesting hearing what Sam said and Fiona said, and, you know, it bubbled up a couple of thoughts in my mind. The PowerPoint about the House of Lords issue over the past week. I just want to reference that because on the day that I went to do my oral evidence at the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee in late January. That was just after I published my open letter, long before I'd actually won equal pay. And in the midst of that, it was quite a moment because obviously some of you will remember there was quite a lot of energy coming off BBC Women at the time in terms of support for the equal pay movement, and I had this pendant says on it, well, you can't see it, but it says I stand with Carrie, hashtag I stand with Carrie, and it was given to me by other BBC women, and you will also possibly remember, tweeted on the 8th of January, I stand with Carrie, on the day when I published my open letter, because the point was, it was a Me Too moment. It was an individual statement, but it was an individual statement of a systemic, embedded, pervasive problem. And by grouping around me and protecting me from consequences, and by standing up alongside me, we made a big point. And obviously our management didn't really like that. So the hashtag I stand with Carrie became a big problem for BBC journalists. And we have impartiality rules, and management made it clear that any use of that hashtag in future would bar people from doing interviews or any presenting on this subject. So obviously for BBC journalists, impartiality is core and compass of who we are, and therefore people had to pull back from. So you will see over the past, since January, BBC people have had to be very much more careful about what they say, and that is one of the reasons why you won't see as much wind in the sail publicly of the BBC Women movement as you saw back in January, because of that kind of pressure. But coming back to the House of Lords, at the moment we were in Portcullis House, me giving evidence and a lot of BBC women with me on that day, on the 31st of Jan. And it was a moment when, power seemed to be in the balance, because obviously there was the established power of a large, lawyered-up corporation, which knew how to game, equality legislation, knew, frankly, that it didn't need to take the Equality Act seriously, and was quite happily resisting all the attempts by individual BBC women to make their case on equal pay. And then because of the open letter, and then because of that parliamentary inquiry, power just trembled for a moment. And there was a scene which encapsulated it in my mind, where I had given 2 hours evidence alongside Michelle Stanistreet of the union, of the National Union of Journalists, and then we had a brief loo break, and luckily the loos were working. I was running up the corridor to get to the loo, to get back into my seat behind the BBC delegation when they were giving their evidence. And as I ran up the corridor past people like Miriam O'Reilly and all the great BBC women who were there, I won't name them because it will get them into trouble, but you can see the pictures if you look back on that day. Swept down upon us came the BBC management delegation, Tony Hall, Anne Bulford, Fran Unsworth, and the chairman, David Clementi. And it was like, and all their support team, and it was like a papal delegation. And there was a kind of moment where we crunched in the middle of the corridor. And it was kind of who's going to kiss whose ring, because me and the badass gang had kind of taken over for the day. And you could see that they were feeling a little uneasy, and the whole tone of their oral evidence was much less complacent and clubbable and comfortable than normal, because they were really sweating. And they were sweating because the emperor had no clothes on, and it was clear to everybody in that hearing that the emperor had no clothes on, and the parliamentarians said it. And here's the rub. And this comes back to Fiona's point about Millicent Fawcett and the fight that goes on from the age of 19 to the age of 71. You know, after that day, the 31st of January, it all went downhill from there. Because where does power reside, really? Establishment power. It resides in the corporations, in the law as that game is played, and in each of our hearts, and in the fact that they control our jobs. So at the end of the day, I would say, at this point in time, that we haven't won. You know, it makes me very angry. And, you know I need to be as patient as Millicent Fawcett to see it as a long game. That, you know, if I started it at 55, well, how many years is that, Fiona? Do I have to kind of 19 to 71, what's that? That's 50. So I would have to be kind of 106 or something before we get equal pay. It's just not good enough for me. I'm not happy to see this go on. It is an unacceptable situation in our country at the moment where women I mean, it just makes me so angry even to restate it. I've done a lot of thinking about it recently because I'm now writing about it. We don't have really any weapons, or not many. We don't have information, as Sam pointed out. You know, how do you get to the bottom of whether you're being paid equally? I have to tell you that at the BBC, most of us have tried very, very hard. We are committed, curious, persistent, truth-telling journalists. We had a union on our side. We had a regulator asking questions of the BBC. We had not one, but now 2 parliamentary committees asking questions. We've had media attention. We've had so much, and yet I have to tell you, we're not winning. And the reason for that is because women can't extract information, which is a key weapon in equal pay. You can't extract information until you get to the point of disclosure in a case, which is a long way down the road in terms of access of justice to a dysfunctional justice system. And there is no serious sanction on the employer. Do you know, I was really struck, and I think a lot of BBC women have been struck by how little employers know about equal pay or about equality legislation. I mean, it's like talking, when you talk to, I don't want to be too mean about the HR team at the BBC, but it is like talking to a dodgy car dealer. They know they've got a faulty vehicle, and they're trying to sell it to you, i.e. sell you the message that your pay is actually equal, by which it's not pay parity, but by which, in my case, for example, it was justifiable that the North America editor was earning nearly 100% more than me. It's fine, Carrie. You know, it's because he X, Y, Z, you know, all these reasons that justify why you're going to pay that person more. So when you face a dodgy car dealer, and they're telling you this, it's like you need to know something about vehicles. You know, you need to be signaling to that dealer that you are not going to be sold, you know, the vehicle that's going to break down in 5 minutes. Or in this case, a story that simply doesn't stand up, that disrespects you as a person, that disrespects your contribution in the workplace. So, what do we have to do? We have to make employers liable. There has to be a cost to them for breaking equality law. There's currently no cost. I mean, almost no cost. We have, and we're about to hear from Sam Walker, who just this week won her case at tribunal. It's 3 years' work. What's it cost the co-op, who discriminated against her on grounds of sex, who paid her unequally, and who dismissed her unfairly, as a court has now found? It's cost them, well, it's going to cost them by the time down, and Sam will tell us more, but not enough, definitely not enough, because it's not going to hurt them hard enough. There needs to be in this country either access to information for women in equal pay cases, much earlier, inside the internal process, immediately, and or there has to be some serious sanction in terms of financial cost and reputational cost. If there's no reporting of these cases, then there's no reputational cost. If there's no punitive damages or no injury to feelings, then there's no financial cost. They're just paying you back the money they actually owed you anyway. That's all they're paying you. And, you know, when you think about this, I want you to be very angry, because if you have to go down this road, you will have been undervalued in the first place for however many years you've been underpaid, and then you will be doing an entirely unpaid second full-time job to try to put that right. And women were doing that in the 80s and the 90s. Why are we still doing it today? We're doing it today because regulation has gone backwards. We're doing it today because the unions are not doing the job. They have lots of problems, there's lots of reasons for this, but they're not effectively running group cases, not nearly enough of them. Employers just don't need to care. So, I have a couple of questions for you, if you don't mind. I want to treat you as a bit of a focus group. How many of you know that your pay is equal? Actually know that your pay is equal, hands up. So, it's hard for me to tell exactly how many that is. I mean, that's quite a few, I'd say. How many of you don't know that your pay is equal? See, I'd say that's more. Yeah, that's more than half of us. How many of you have challenged your pay on equal pay grounds? Oh, impressive. We got the right focus group here. Good for all of you, because that's not an easy thing to do, as I know. How many of you have fought an equal pay case? That's 1, 2, 3, 4. Well done to all of you, because I know from looking at it, didn't do it. I won mine internally in the end, but I had to look hard at fighting it externally, and I take my hat off to all of you. So, how many of you have followed the reporting of an equal pay case in tribunal in the past year? That's a good number. How many of you not followed the reporting of an equal pay case in tribunal? That's a bigger number. Now, I'd say that's not your fault. I'd say that the media are not covering those cases. And that I'd say there's a public education problem about equal pay. It's embedded, it's invisible, no one really wants us to see it, or not enough people want us to see it. The other thing is access to justice. Only highly paid people really can afford to go for individual cases, or really, I don't want to say only, but there are very few people other than, you know, highly paid women, like me or like Sam, who can afford to consider taking a case to tribunal, and Sam has, and she'll tell us about it. And that is because, you know, it is so expensive. When I was looking at this at the beginning, I was talking to, I mean, the BBC, which is funded by your license, it buys the best lawyers. It gets completely lawyered up. And you, if you're going to take it on, you have to think about having the kind of lawyer who can go into battle against a big corporation, like the BBC or like the Co-op. They only buy the best to fight you, the lone woman. So when you're looking at that, that's going to be £500 plus VAT, you know, in London or something like that. That's why we need Emma and her team at Yes Law, and that's why we need this equal pay fund, because we need to provide legal education to those who are being discriminated against, and we need to help them to solve the thing internally, to tell the dodgy car dealer, no, actually, I don't think that's a fit vehicle. You know, Emma and co at Yes Law have explained my legal rights to me, and as I understand it, my situation is thus. And when an employee can start talking to their employer like that, the picture changes, the story changes. I went through 5 or 6 different conversations along these lines about what constituted equality in terms of my pay, and it was only right at the end that I won equal pay internally. But it was by holding firm and by having a great pro bono lawyer, legal advice, which enabled me to say, that's not right, and I'm not having it. So I think it's great that we've got the service. I'd really be grateful if you could all get out and support it and proselytise for it. That would be brilliant, because then we can have employment advice for those and access to justice for those who can't otherwise afford it, without hopefully going to law, without hopefully going through what Sam has gone through.